if we want a serious discussion about land reform, we should probably get out of the denialism of black pain and the denialism of black dispossession, and recognize that the constitutional framework was itself intended as an instrument for the liberation of African people over a colonial process. So I don't see the Constitution in the same way as many people who debate about the Constitution as protecting or restraining the capacity of the state from facilitating socio-economic transformation. To the contrary, I see the Constitution as an instrument for socio-economic transformation. So the big part of this discussion should be how we reconsider the constitutional state and how we put at the center of the constitutional state the project of transformation. But nevertheless, and contrary to some of the sort of more radical speakers on this topic, nevertheless, I am still an adherent to a constitutional solution to the land reform project. So when we talk about Section 25 of the Constitution, a lot of people refer to Section 25 as a property clause. But you might as well look at Section 25 as an anti-property clause. It's the clause that entitles the state to interfere in property relations, in individual rights to property for the larger benefit of the South African state. So it is in part, and this is again, maybe still more convincing, in part why you should buy my book, if you've got the money, so that you can understand the context, so that you can be, what do the Twitter people call it, woke or something. All right, but I think today's discussion is a much more focused one on the current context and not on the historical context, right? And the current context also has some kind of history. It's got some background. 27 April 1994, we adopt an interim constitution. It contains provisions around property. That is then replaced in February 1996 by the final constitution, which contains Section 25. Section 25 is a long subsection with 9 subsections, right? It opens with no one may be deprived of property and no law may allow arbitrary deprivations of property. This is a very important opening to Section 25 because it illustrates the point that this is not a property clause, this is an anti-property clause. How that clause came to be framed the way it was is because there was a contest. The ANC negotiators went into CODESA and the subsequent Constitutional Assembly with their negotiating position largely containing all of the clauses that we see in Section 25. On the other hand, the National Party and parties like the DP, I saw the DA the other day saying, "Viva Section 25." The truth is that they actually opposed Section 25 during the negotiations. And the reason they opposed Section 25 was because they wanted to entrench an unqualified right to private property. That was fought, and ultimately it was resolved at the Constitutional Court because there was a provision in the principles of constitution making that the Constitution would have to be certified by the Constitutional Court. One of the most contentious clauses was Section 25. The proposal by the ANC, which is an anti-property clause, and the proposal by the National Party, the DP, Inkatha Freedom Party, and all of these other similarly minded parties. I'm sorry if they are DA people, and I'm saying they're similarly minded to the IFP. At the time, they were on the property clause. These days, there's a bit of radicalism emerging there. But the point is that this debate was ultimately resolved in a 1997 judgment by the Constitutional Court, which endorsed the anti-property provisions. In other words, endorsed Section 25(1). No one may be deprived of property except in terms of a law of general application, and no law may permit arbitrary deprivations of property. So our conception of Section 25 first needs to align with the fundamental premise of the section that we don't have a property clause. We don't have a private property clause. What we have is an anti-property property clause that enables the state to interfere in private property in order to redress the historical wrongs. So that is the point of departure in understanding Section 25. But unlike other constitutional property provisions in comparable countries, our Section 25 then contains 8 subclauses. What do those subclauses do? They do primarily 3 things. The first is that they give the state the power of expropriation. So the state in this country is constitutionally empowered to expropriate private property. In other words, to forcibly take private property. But that power of expropriation is constrained, internally constrained first, because the land or property, because it's broader than land, can only be expropriated for public purposes and in the public interest. And those 2 concepts are crucial because public purposes and public interest are not the same. Public interest incorporates land reform. In other words, under the Constitution, the state is entitled to expropriate land for a broader redistribution program. Right? So they have the power. They've had the power since 1994, but it is a power they have not used. The second thing that happens in Section 25 is that when they exercise the power of expropriation, they must pay compensation in accordance with a formula called just and equitable formula. And although they have that power, what they have done over the past 23 years, they have not actually exercised the just and equitable payment formula. What they have done instead is to rely on a market-determined dispensation, the so-called willing seller, willing buyer. They again have no constitutional obligations. In fact, their obligation is contrary to what they have been doing. But I read something somewhere that Ruth Hall says that the market-related formula actually came to South Africa via the World Bank. So I'm not surprised.